Good morning. I use the process of I need to see people's faces when I talk to steal their energy, and if it's going badly, I can prepare for thrown vegetables and things like that. Imagine for just a second that you're walking home alone and it's dark. And everything's going fine. But then suddenly you see a stranger up ahead. And if you're anything like me, that's when the wiring in your brain starts throwing up red flags. What if they're crazy? What if they're murderers? And we start to get afraid. And fear brings out the worst in us. It's stuff, fight or flight stuff, but more in general, we become stupider and meaner when we're afraid. And what's even worse, in our world today where it seems like we don't need each other that much anymore, you go to McDonald's and they want you to use the kiosk. You can't even talk to someone about your McCheese. And then you can just start making up stories about people. Anyone who's different, it takes almost no time to say, well, I don't need them, which I would say in general is a lie, but it's a lie that's easy to believe. And then you can say, oh, they're probably awful. We're in competition. There's certainly not enough for everyone. So I guess today, since the wiring of our brains tells us to be afraid all the time, I want to tell stories about how do we meet strangers? How do we connect? How do we start to see strangers instead of, are they murderers? And start looking at them as, you're the person I've been looking for. My dad would have been 100 years old in June. Certainly a product of his generation. He's the kind of guy who, instead of telling me he loved me, would change my oil. And some people think that's horrible, but I spoke fluid oil change. So, I knew what he was doing. We cared, and most importantly, he kind of was showing, I'm there for you. No expectations, just help. Now, anyone in my family would say that my mom was the storyteller because she would make up crazy stories all the time. My dad was a lot more quiet. At 18, he got drafted. That was 1944, World War II, the last year. He got sent to the Philippines. and never told stories about it. In fact, he had one war story. It was about little kids singing, Moshi Moshi Anone. He died when he was 66 in 92. So he's been gone a while, but, you know, I'm retired and sometimes bored. And I've discovered I have access to AI on my phone. And so I've been trying to come up with information on my dad. This is a picture of his war medals that my sister kind of made a shadow box of them, but for most of my life, they were in the attic. And I put into AI, what are the medals for in this picture? I remember when my dad died in 92, one of my classmates said that one of them's a big deal. But, you know, I couldn't ask my dad about it at his funeral, so at the time, I had no real good way of researching that when I was working and mowing the grass and all of those other things. But now with AI, I learned that one of them is a Bronze Star, which is the third or fourth highest medal for valor for soldiers. And I learned that my dad's kind of got a special one. It's not like he ran into a burning building or anything. In 1957, they gave Bronze Stars to all soldiers who were in the front line for an extended period of time. I had no idea. Learned that my dad was in the Battle of Manila, which was the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. I learned that in that battle they had something called house-to-house warfare. I had pictured the Philippines as kind of being a jungle, but it was a city. And what was happening was that the streets were all mined. So you went literally from house to house. It was more complicated because the Japanese had been ordered not to surrender. And so even though the city was taken back, it's MacArthur's I Shall Return. It's Manila where he was going back to. And apparently my dad was part of that. Roughly 1 out of 35 soldiers in that battle died. Roughly 1 of 5 were wounded. 100,000 civilians were killed. That's nuclear weapon territory, but this was just bombing a big city with artillery. I had no idea. And he was 18. When I was 18, I was figuring out how to parallel park at Loyola. I'm sure he knew people who died. I'm not sure, but I highly suspect he killed people. And what's even stranger is that when it was finally done, because apparently no one in the armed forces had heard about trauma. Second medal here, the Occupation of Japan medal. So he was transferred to Japan after the bombings. I talked about how we're all wired to be afraid. And I'm talked about just its human nature to hold grudges and see enemies. But I want to make it very clear. My father told no stories about that. Other things that come to mind during all of this, because I'm the firstborn and had not been born, it's very clear to me that my father was an expendable soldier. Throw enough people at the problem, and it boggles my mind that someone in leadership can believe that 1 in 35 surviving, or 35 people surviving. It boggles my mind that that's seen as a good plan. Where are the plans where everybody matters? Where are the plans where we don't make up stories about the enemy? How do we get to meet people? That song, my dad's story about the war. Little kids singing mushy mushy anone, 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 mushy mushy anone, aso deso. If you put that into AI, it tells you what it means. Apparently, this is an American propaganda song that pretty much is also called the telephone song. And the words basically are, hello, hello, are you there? Can you hear me? Hello, hello? And oddly enough, even though the United States government at that time was saying to all the soldiers who were occupying Japan, my dad was shipped directly from Manila to Tokyo. They were told that people are going to hate you and they're going to attack you with bamboo swords. And on the Japanese side, they were saying that Americans are savages and they're going to kill everyone when they come. But this stupid propaganda song was a big hit. And when he went over there, people were actually saying, hello, hello. And it was to the tune of London bridges, for Pete's sake. And that's the story my dad told. Little kids singing hello, hello, and soldiers singing back, hello, hello. The title of this sermon is Stories to Live By. We can all tell stories that make us feel good. But I really think those kids and this story of my dad's was how he stayed a decent human being. Because instead of coming home with hate and pointing out differences and talking atrocities, he locked into kids singing. Those kids fixed him when the war had broken him. Now, it still took 8 years before I came along, so I suspect Dad wondered if this world was worth bringing kids into or not. And I think he had to figure out for a while, how do you attempt a normal life where you change your kids' oil? I'm pretty happy he figured it out. And I became aware, I guess through both my mom and dad, that not only stories are important, but they can keep you alive. Bouncing forward from the war to 92. My dad's 66, and he has cancer. And I've been asked to talk in a church, kind of like this. It's a Catholic church, and there's an altar girl, so it must have been a radical Catholic church at the time. And I'm nervous and killing time and looking through the order of service Sunday bulletin thing. And I see that day's Mass is for someone with the same last name as the altar girl. For those not familiar with the Catholic tradition, Masses used to cost $5. And you pretty much used it to remember your dad or your wedding anniversary or, something that you wanted to remember and maybe go to church a special time, every year for the next 10 years kind of a thing. So I said, do you know the person who this Mass is for? And the little kid said, yeah, it's my grandfather. And I said, tell me something about your grandfather. And I'm ashamed to say I don't remember what she said, but she beamed. Because like all good grandfathers, his spoiled her rotten and made her feel important. And we talked for a bit, and it was getting time to, start the service. And then she paused for a second and looked at me and said, oh, and I'm sorry your dad has cancer. Because we had been praying in church for few months about that kind of candles of community thing. And she said, we're all praying for him. Now let me make it real clear. She knew that prayers didn't save her grandfather. And those prayers didn't save my dad either. But she kind of saved me by making me feel not alone And that might have been the day I started going off script with sermons. Because instead of talking about whatever I had figured out, I talked about her. And I talked about the greatest thing human beings can do is feel compassion for each other. You know, it's our broken stuff that really connects us forever. Everyone has people die. And it's really good if you don't go through that alone. So, you know, I had a 10-year-old hero who helped me through my dad's death. And then just a few weeks ago, I think I told a bunch of people in this church about this. I had been watching something on YouTube about Ram Dass, who, for those of you who don't know, he was a Harvard professor, wealthy, smart, affluent, who kind of became famous with Timothy Leary for experimenting with LSD, which at the time was perfectly legal. And he wanted to enlighten his mind because he figured out that being famous and smart and having money wasn't good enough. And so he also, in his search, went to the East and met a Maharishi who changed his name. And he came back and kind of became a rock star for the Buddhist tradition, writing books, doing public speaking. And I guess I knew all this somewhere in the back of my head, but it wasn't really important to me. But then I learned that he had a massive stroke. And for the last 25 or so years of his life, he pretty much sat. I guess eventually he kind of learned to talk a little bit. And he kind of fooled around with dictating books, and I don't know anything about any of that really, but the title of his last book is called Walking Each Other Home. And I'm just moved by that because we're people who, when we walk home by ourselves, we get scared. But I like to picture that if we're walking with each other, we feel safer. And we, can cry on each other's shoulders and laugh. And no one's in charge and there are no rules, but we're just us. And in my fantasies, when the people I'm walking home with see a stranger up ahead, even if it's dark, if I'm walking together, we can walk up to him and say, "Hey, what are you about? Do you need help? Do you want to walk with us?" I guess that's my model of church. And I guess my dream is we quit walking alone and making up stories about the people we don't know. My dream is that we start walking together. And when we see someone we don't know, we figure they're a gift from God. And we should probably go figure out what they're all about. Verna said no clapping in church.
That was the perfect time to clap, I promise. Kurt,